right, so we are in week 2 of this series. He's still got the whole world in his hands. Aaron did a great job kicking that off for us last Sunday. But we're doing this, we're exploring this series. We're digging the scripture and looking at situations to be reminded that in the midst of uncertainty, I think we can all agree we're in a time of uncertainty right now with a bunch of things. God is still in control. God is still working, and we can trust in that. And the goal is to grow in our trust of this truth, that while life will be uncertain, God is not uncertain. God works. God operates. And what the thing with uncertainty is, as we deal with those things that we don't really know what's coming, with the questions that we have, uncertainty, what it does is it starts to create insecurity and fear. And I'm sure you can agree with that. Anytime life has hit you and you're not really sure what's next, what's going to happen with the job or the family or the finances, it starts creating insecurity, it starts creating fear. And we as humans, we like being in control, right? We like knowing what's happening. We like controlling our destiny. And when we don't have that control, fear and insecurity creeps in. I think of this summer, and it still cracks me up, is Noah. We were doing baseball this summer, kind of had this Sandlot team put together, and they started kind of transitioning from coach pitch to kid pitch. And kind of what happens, the first time they did it, the first 3 innings of the game was coach pitch. The second 3 innings of the game became kid pitch. And I remember Noah, who's 8, playing with some kids older than him, looked at me, he's like, "Wait, we're doing kid pitch?" I'm like, "Yeah, we're doing kid pitch today, buddy. It's time to jump in." He's like, "I can't do that." I'm like, "Dude, you can do this." And so Noah goes up for his first at bat for kid pitch. And I'm coaching third base, and he's a lefty, so I can see his face. And he's up there, and he gets in the box. And I swear, if the batter box is here, he barely stepped in. It's like he's officially in. He gets up there, and his eyes are wide. He's like, "Oh my, what's about to happen right now?" And so the first pitch comes in. It made me not this bad, but I'm gonna say it was it hit the catcher's mitt, and then he swung. He was just way behind. It was not good. The second pitch comes in. He goes, and he's still way behind. I'm like, okay, it's gonna be a rough, first time hitting for him. That's fine. He'll get better at it. He'll get used to it. But he's uncertain right now, so he's insecure. He's fearful. Third pitch comes in, and the kid fouled it off. I'm like, okay, the fact you even, you foul tipped the ball, that's a win right now. Fourth pitch comes in. He's timing it better. He fouls it off again. Fifth pitch comes in. He fouls it off again. I'm like, this kid is close to lining this up. This is going to be great for his first time. Sixth pitch comes in, hits him square in the foot. Just drops him to the ground. And so he's down, and he feels it. His coach pitch, it's pretty straight. It's pretty easy. Even if the coach hits you, he's not throwing it real fast. This one stung. And so I'm like, all right, well, welcome to kid pitch, buddy. His next time at bat, kid pitch again. This time doesn't get a warning. First pitch, square in the knee this time. So his first 2 at bats, he gets beamed. And the second one off the knee, you can see he's feeling the pain. And so he is just welcomed into kid pitch with a couple of bean balls. It's good for him, but the fear he had, and actually he had that fear and insecurity for a while after that, until he realized, oh, I can do this. I can get better at this. But this is what uncertainty does. We don't like uncertainty because it brings insecurity. It brings fear into our lives. But here's the truth about God. God works really well in uncertainty. It's kind of when he gets our attention. It's when hopefully he gets the nation's attention. It's when he causes us to realign our values. It's when he causes people to repent, hopefully, from their sin. It's when things happen, we go, oh, you know what? My life is kind of a mess right now, and I'm not paying attention to God at all. And so uncertainty, God's like, let me do some work there. Let me get your attention there. And it's when it causes us to depend on God more. And so just real quick, you don't have to shout yes or no, but have any of you watching online or in person found faith or returned to faith during a difficult period of life? I think for a lot of us, we have. We've kind of let's realign our lives back to God or with God maybe for the first time because of uncertainty going on. God does some great work in the midst of uncertainty. And we tend to get real spiritual during uncertainty and difficulties. And honestly, I don't think that's a bad thing. There's sometimes people are like, oh yeah, things are going tough now you need God. Well, I think that's God working, saying, hey, you're not paying attention. I'm going to work in the midst of your uncertainty to let you know I'm still here. It's when he does his work. And because the truth is, we don't learn a lot from God. We don't trust God a lot when things are good. In fact, as things are going good, we tend to trust God less and less. We learn and grow more when things don't go well. We don't like that. I don't like saying that, but it's the truth. This is what happens in life. And when we're in the midst of uncertainty, this is when God works. And right now, we're in the midst of some pretty big uncertainty. for a lot of reasons. Like, look at the big picture right now, for instance. We are still in the midst of election uncertainty. Not in the results, those are pretty clear, so let's chill out on that right now. But in the state of our nation, it's very divided. It's very tense. There's a lot of people happy right now. There's a lot of people angry right now. There's a lot of threats and all these different things going on both sides. It's very divided. People are upset. That creates uncertainty, insecurity, and fear. Follow that. On top of that, we're still in the midst of a pandemic, and numbers are going way up right now for COVID. It's impacting our county. It's starting to impact our schools. It's starting to impact things all around us, and we have to really wonder, what's that going to mean? What's going to happen? Are we going to shut down again? People are feeling uncertain about what's to come. And there's still a lot of social unrest, racial unrest, and all those uncertainties create insecurities, it creates fears, it creates tensions, and we're kind of wondering what's next. That's just on a big picture level. Let's bring it down a little bit. Let's just talk about our church for a second. We're in the midst of uncertainty. We don't know what's happening with this building right now. We're still trying to figure out all the things of what's possible, of how we can figure out where to meet, how to meet, when to meet. Those uncertainties are kind of creating, okay, we don't know what's going to happen yet. It's a real situation we're dealing with. As soon as we know more, we're going to let you guys know. But I promise you, the leadership team is working behind the scenes, exploring any and all options possible. So we're in that type of uncertainty. With COVID numbers rising, there's a possibility we may have to go back online like we did for quite a few months. March, April, May, and June, like those things, like it's possible. We'll communicate those things to you guys, but it's very uncertain right now. We have no idea what's going to take place. There's church pastor friends that I know here in Pittsburgh. They've canceled services for today because of the numbers in their community. And so we're dealing with that uncertainty on a medium-sized picture as a church. Then think smaller picture, even individually. I know there's a lot of us dealing with uncertainty. First of all, holidays are coming. That creates uncertainty for people. It can be a very difficult time for people. It's getting darker earlier. It's getting colder, which brings more depression. Seasonal depression disorder is a very real thing. It brings loneliness. Those things go up this time of year. Financial hardships happen more this time of year too. They can mount up, causing stress, anxiety, uncertainty. There's a lot of stuff going on right now. This is why this series, I think, is so important for us as a church, as a people, and in our culture right now. So the question is, what do we do with that? What are we doing with that? It starts with first trusting that God is working. This is what Aaron dove into last week, that God does some of his best work in the biggest messes. That was his one thing for us to remember last week. But that's God working. We should trust that. The question I think we can raise is, well, what do we do during this time? Because it doesn't mean we don't work in uncertainty. It doesn't mean we just sit back and do nothing. In fact, as we do work, and that's the tension we're raising today, is what do we do in the midst of fear, insecurity, and uncertainty? And we're going to look at someone today who went through a crazy amount of uncertainty. And this is going to sound crazy to hear what he says to do. And if you're watching right now in person or online and you're not a follower of Jesus, you may look at what this person says and go and think, this guy's insane. In fact, if you're a follower of Jesus, you may think this guy's insane for saying what he says to do in the midst of uncertainty. But this is what we're going to dive into. And we're going to look at 4 verses today. Just 4 short verses that hopefully we can remember and apply and understand what we should be doing in uncertainty. But let me give you some context first. We're looking at Paul, one of the apostles who wrote most of the New Testament. And we're looking specifically of his letter to the Philippians. And here's the context. It's the letter that Paul wrote to Christians in Philippi, which was the first church ever established in Europe. It's written by Paul, and he's writing it from Rome. You see, what happened was Paul was arrested before this in Jerusalem, and he was sent to Rome for trial because Paul was also a Roman citizen. He knew things wouldn't go well in Jerusalem, so he claimed his Roman citizenship, saying, you have to send me to Rome for trial, and this is what sent Paul from Jerusalem to Rome after he was arrested. But here's what happens along the way. On the way from Jerusalem to Rome, his ship got into a storm. They were swept out to sea for 2 weeks. So they're just lost at sea for 2 weeks. After that, the ship eventually wrecks on the island of Malta, and they are there for 3 months. So Paul is a prisoner. He's at sea for 2 weeks. Then he's at this island of Malta for 3 months because their ship wrecked and they couldn't get to where they were going. Eventually, they get to Rome, and Paul is put on house arrest waiting for his trial. And the systems must have been really backed up because he waited for 2 years in house arrest. So he has no idea what's going to happen. The uncertainty continues to mount. While he's on house arrest, he started preaching the good news of who Jesus Christ was and started drawing crowds to the house he was at. And so he's making an impact while he's a prisoner. But eventually, fast forward a little bit, Paul is put to death. He goes to trial. He gets sentenced to death. He is beheaded for what he's done against, they found him guilty for his accusations. But in that time, from the time he was arrested until his death, there was uncertainty. He had no idea what was going to happen next, where he was going to be, how long he was going to be there, what was going to take place. Remember, as he's writing this letter to the Philippians, he's in prison, probably knowing his life is going to end shortly. And he's writing this letter, and he starts wrapping up his letter. We're not looking at the whole thing, just a few verses. He's wrapping up his letter to the Philippians, and we pick it up in chapter 4, verse 4. And this is what Paul says. Remember, he's in prison. He goes, "Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice." Dude's in prison, probably going to die, and he says, rejoice in the Lord always. Rejoice, that word means this state of happiness, being glad. And he says, rejoice, be glad, be happy, be the state of happiness in the Lord. In the Lord. So it's this place where we find our happiness, this state of being. So if you want to kind of understand maybe in a different context, replace the Lord statement with something else. So rejoice, be happy in blank. Replace the Lord. It could be something, rejoice in your job promotion. We get a job promotion. We're happy about that, right? We find gladness in that. Rejoice, this is a good one. Rejoice in your engagement. If you get engaged, and I want to pause right there because our good buddy, Scott Anderson, over here in the tech booth, you can't see him online. Scott just got engaged last weekend. And so that's exciting, absolutely. His fiance, Christy, is bless her heart, she chose to stay with Scott for the rest of her life. So, she's a servant. No, we are pumped for Scott. That's something they rejoice in. They're rejoicing. They're happy. They're glad in the state of their engagement. That's something to be rejoicing about. Finding out you're going to have a baby. Rejoice in that good news. Finding out the Steelers win the Super Bowl. We would be rejoicing in that good news. Or even crazier, rejoicing the fact the Pirates may win the World Series one day. Could you imagine if that happens? Literally, I kid you not, I will be in tears, sobbing like a baby if the Pirates ever do that in my lifetime. Even Noah's like, Dad, are the Pirates going to be good in my lifetime? I'm like, I don't know, buddy. That's uncertain. And I know that's insecurity and fear, but you know what? One day maybe we can rejoice in some good news, but we rejoice in something. We're glad in something. This is what Paul is saying to do. Rejoice in the thing that brings you happiness. But he says, you rejoice in the Lord. That you find your state of happiness, you find your gladness, you find your joy in Jesus. And he says, always. Now, when is always? Is that sometimes? Is that whenever things are good? Whenever you have time? No, Paul says, always rejoice in the Lord. He's been saying that after everything he's been through, he's been shipwrecked, stranded at sea, he's on house arrest, going to be put to death. And he's saying, no matter what you're dealing with, rejoice in the Lord. That's where your happiness, that's where your state of gladness comes from. And he knows death is coming. And then he says it again, just in case we missed it. For those who sit in the back not paying attention, he says it again, rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say, rejoice. He's saying that we find our happiness, our gladness in Jesus, despite our circumstances, despite uncertainty, despite insecurity and fear. We find happiness in Jesus and nowhere else. And this is why the church is so vital. It's the reminder of where we find our happiness. When we gather on Sundays, we're reminded that we find our joy and our happiness and our gladness in Jesus. And this is why we sing. This is why Aaron leads us in worship. This is why we celebrate when someone is baptized. This is why we started One Church, is we rejoice in the truth of who Jesus is. That's where we find our happiness. Then Paul continues, though, verse 5, he says, let your gentleness be evident to all because the Lord is near. Because often uncertainty leads to fear. There's a great theologian one time who says this, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. The great Yoda said that once. And so it's a reminder that this is what sometimes when uncertainty and fear can bring. It leads us to anger. It leads us to hate. It leads us to suffering. Now, think about this. Think about just, our culture right now and the hatred that's being spewed in the political spectrum. There's a lot of stuff being said. If you really break it down, though, what's causing that? It's not so much that they really do hate what the other side thinks. It's the fear that creeps into their lives. It's when they are unsure of what's taking place in the future. It's the uncertainty that it brings, and that fear creates anger, and that anger leads to hate, and that hate leads to suffering, like Yoda said. But, it's from a movie, but it's true. We've lived it. We've experienced it. But Paul says to let gentleness be shown to all, that in the midst of our uncertainty, when fear can creep in, when insecurity can creep in, that we don't let fear take over. We let gladness lead the way, gentleness lead the way, to remember that Jesus is near, and let that drive you to treat people with kindness. With kindness. If you're mad about the election, respond with kindness. If you're happy about the election, respond with kindness. If people treat you poorly, you respond with kindness. If the weight of fear and uncertainty is getting to you, remember that God is near and is working. Rejoice and respond with kindness, because gentleness is the fruit of the Spirit. That when we are following Jesus, gentleness should be being produced in our lives because of our faith in Jesus. Paul writes that, the fruit of the Spirit, our lives following Jesus, will produce certain things: love, joy, peace, patience. Gentleness is one of those things. And if we're following Jesus, this will grow and be revealed in our actions. So be gentle, lead with kindness. So Paul says that. So he says to rejoice, be gentle, but then he says this. He says, do not be anxious about anything, verse 6. But in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. He says, do not be anxious. And anxiety is at an all-time high in our society. I mean, that's almost a pandemic in and of itself. The anxiety that people are dealing with. And anxiety is this feeling of troubling feeling, distracted, worry about what's to come. And, Paul says in every situation, don't be anxious. Don't be fearful. Don't be troubled. Don't be distracted or worried about what's to come. He's in every situation. But he says, with prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Present is better understood here, as it was written in the original language, as reveal your requests. So it's not just like, God, help me find a job, but more so, God, hey, I'm worried about this thing, about not having a job. This fear of not being able to provide for my family and not going to be able to do whatever. The things that lie deeper within our requests to God. Because oftentimes what we do when it comes to our prayer life is we kind of give God our wish list. Like, hey, God, do this, 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 and this. But really what Paul's saying, hey, no, reveal to God what the real issue is. Because most of the time, our requests to God, there's a much deeper thing going on underneath that. It's not just the surface. It goes beyond the surface. It's not just make the coronavirus go away, but I'm anxious that I might get sick, or I may lose my job, or I may lose my business, which then means this is going to happen, which then means this is going to happen. And there's these deeper rooted fears and insecurities that lie in our things that we're presenting to God. And here's the truth. God already knows what those things are. When you present your prayer requests to God, he knows what lies deep in your heart. Let's not think like we're fooling him. He knows what really is going on. The truth is what Paul is saying here, with us presenting with prayer and petition our requests to God, it's helping us understand ourselves in this moment. Part of prayer is understanding where our heart really lies and understanding what really lies beneath what we're asking God for. He knows, but he wants us to understand what we're asking for so we can learn to trust him for what really matters. Not the list of things, but our deep-rooted insecurities and fear. I had a mentor when I worked in youth ministry, and he helped me with a lot of things of just understanding concepts of why we do what we do. I remember he put me through this exercise, and I was so angry when we did it because it was driving me nuts. But what he did, we were getting ready for a winter camp, and I loved winter camp. You can talk to Scott and Jess. It was one of my favorite things we ever did in youth ministry. We spent a weekend away. We played broom ball, which is like hockey on ice, but with shoes, and it's a mess. Everyone's falling everywhere. It's fantastic. Toboggan runs. It's just a great time. And I remember he goes, what are you doing, coming up in February? I'm like, we're doing the winter retreat. He goes, what's so important about that? And I was like, well, it's awesome. And then he goes, well, what's so important about that? And I was like, because it's a good time. And he goes, what's so important about that? And he kept asking that question, what's so important about that? What's so important about that? Until I really got down to the deeper rooted issue of why we do winter camp. It wasn't just a simple fun weekend. It was a chance to break away with students and our leaders, to hang out with them, to build relationships with them, to help them trust Jesus more. But I never marketed it that way. I was just like, let's go have a great time at winter camp. But what he started doing is he started asking the question is, what's so important about that? So let me ask you this. Right now, what are you praying for? And what's so important about that? And when you answer that question, let me ask you again, what's so important about that? What's so important about that? What's so important about that? And the deeper we get down into it, the more we know where our heart really lies and what we're praying for. Understand? And so this is what Paul's saying with prayer and petition, present these requests to God, because then you really know what's going on in you. And we present that situation to God. We could say, God, the situation is not so much the coronavirus, it's what lies underneath that. And that's where my fear is. That's where my insecurity is. That's where my uncertainty is. And I know you've got the whole world in your hands right now, but I've just got to let you know, this is what I'm scared of. And then we're now handing that over to God. And that's a whole different situation than just saying, make this thing go away. This is how we respond with every situation, with prayer, especially the things that give us uncertainty. And if you have kids, I'm going to encourage you to do this. Involve them in this process. This is something I need to grow with as a parent. Is the things that Danielle and I stress about and we talk about after the kids go to bed, some of those things I should be including the conversations with Noah, Drew, and Kobe. And saying, guys, here's why this thing is stressful. Here's what brings us fear, and here's how we need to trust God more. And so if you have kids, bring them and involve them in that process of presenting your requests to God. Now, you don't have to unveil every little detail because they're not able to handle that yet, obviously, but they should know what's going on around them. They should know what's happening, and we should be discipling them as parents of how we trust God more in the midst of that. This is what Paul says to do, to rejoice, to be gentle, and to pray. This is how we work in uncertainty. This is what we do in uncertainty. God works in the mess. He always has. He always will. But we need to let that mess get our attention back to God. We need to realize that we have a role to play in this, that we are to rejoice in Jesus, to be gentle with others, and to pray in all situations. But all too often, uncertainty brings fear that can lead us not to act, that we freeze, and that keeps us from rejoicing in Jesus. And that fear leads us not to be gentle with people, especially those we deem as against us in a situation. And even if we pray, it's more about help us, God, or fix this situation, God, rather than releasing our fear and worry back to God. But when we trust God in our uncertainty, we realize that we should lean more into him, to rejoice, to act with kindness because God is near, and to pray, and not just pray, but to really pray, to really present our requests to God of what's happening in our lives. And then, when we do that, when we put that work into trusting God, then things happen. Something that doesn't even make sense to the outside world. But this is what Paul says. This is the fourth verse of these four in verse 7. He says, and then the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your heart and minds in Christ Jesus. Let me ask you this question. Would you like to have some peace in the midst of uncertainty? The things that cause you insecurity and fear right now, would you like to have some peace in the midst of those things, even though you don't know what's going to happen in the long run? Would you like to have some peace? Because all around us, we hear people fighting for answers through the uncertainty. We need a vaccine to fix this, and that'll go make our problems go away. We need to deal with it and open up the economy because that's what's going to fix the situation. This is the way the country should be run. No, this is the way the country should be run. All these things that are floating around us. Would you like to have some peace in that? Because right now what we hear is if you just do this, then things will get better. But if you just do this instead, then things will get better. But the truth is, you can do all those things, and things aren't going to get better because there's going to be more problems. Would you like to have some peace in the midst of uncertainty? Because the real answer is found in having that peace from God that transcends all understanding. That while life is in chaos, we can still have peace. Let me ask you guys this. Has there ever been a time in your life where you've experienced peace from God when there really shouldn't have been peace? When you're like, this makes no sense. I should not be this calm about this. I should not have this peace about this, despite what's going on around me. And if you've answered yes to that, and I know most of you are, because a few are going, right now, and I'm guessing some are watching online right now, what that reminds us is this, is that peace is still available to us today. This is not something Paul wrote, almost 2,000 years ago, and now it doesn't exist for us. No, today, this peace that transcends all understanding is still available for us today. So here's our one thing. To pray until that peace comes. Don't pray until peace comes because our world's going to be chaotic no matter what. Pray until that peace comes. When I say that peace, it's the peace that transcends all understanding. It's the peace that we have when the outside world goes, what is up with them? That doesn't make sense. They should not be this calm about this. They should not have this much trust in the midst of this uncertain situation. This is that peace that we're talking about. Pray until that peace comes. that while God is at work in uncertainty, we have work to do as well. That we have to cast off our fears, our insecurities, our anxieties onto God because he's the one who can really handle it. And we trust that he has our world in his hands. Not the whole world, not just the whole world, but our own world and our own fears and our own insecurities, that we can trust that God's got our world in his hands. That he's working. And this is our reminder that he's doing that. Because when our world's a mess, God offers us peace. That doesn't make sense to anybody else. But the followers of Jesus, to us it does. Pray for that peace to come. I grew up going to church. My mom had me and my brothers in church a lot. Sunday mornings, I was involved with a youth group, all that stuff. And one of the most consistent people in my life from probably at the age of like 5, 6 years old until, graduating high school was Bob Huber, my pastor. And Bob had so much impact on my life, my family. He's a big reason I'm in ministry today. But Bob was just this unbelievable mentor. He was amazing. Well, this summer, a lot of you guys know this, Bob passed away from stage 4 lymphoma. And it was something we knew possibly was coming, but it happened. What I wasn't ready for, though, and I've been, as a pastor, like sometimes I just assumed I'd be involved with like these really sad situations with funerals and death and things like that. Thankfully, right now I haven't. My experience as a pastor has just not brought me down that road. But this summer I've dealt with it a lot, and Bob was one of them. And I still remember, I'll never forget this, the moment I knew Bob was going to die soon. I was teaching at a camp this summer, and it was a junior high camp. It was tons of fun, and it was what was so important about that is because I gotta have a great time. That's what was so important about that. But I remember getting a text from Bob's phone from his wife, Kathy, and he goes, "Hey Brandon, this is Kathy. Bob's not doing great. I know he'd love to see you soon." And I was like, "Yes, I'll come down and see him." And he was in a local hospital here in Pittsburgh. Camp ends Friday. I can come down Saturday morning. And she goes, "Saturday may be too late." Now, at this point, I never thought Bob was anywhere close to death because 2 weekends before that, he was preaching at my home church. Like, he had his chemo haircut. He was dealing with all that stuff, but he was up. He was preaching. He was laying down the truth of the gospel of who Jesus was. He was throwing down like he always has done for as long as I've known him in the 40-plus years he was at my home church. I heard he'd gotten sick and he was having an issue, so he went to the hospital to get checked out. But I thought, he'll get figured out. He'll go back home, and he's still got time because he's still got stuff to do. And she says, "No, you got to get here." So this was Wednesday of that week. So like that evening, I was like, "Guys, tomorrow morning I'm out. Like, take care of the camp, do what you got to do." And they did. They were fine. And I remember driving down to Pittsburgh. I'm like, "Okay, I'm going to go see Bob," but I had no idea what to expect. And Kathy was going to meet me at the hospital, and I beat her to it. And it's in the middle of COVID. Things were still pretty shut down for a lot of things. And I remember walking in there like, "Well, sir, you can't be here right now." I'm like, "No, I'm a pastor." And they're like, "Oh, come on in," which was kind of cool. I can thank Bob for that, I guess, being a pastor. But they let me right in. And I walked up, and it felt like a scene from a movie. Everything's has plastic coverings up on the desks, all the workers and things, which is great because they need to be as safe as they possibly can. I'm just walking, and I'm not saying anything. I got my mask on, and people are just quietly working, and just had this very eerie feeling to it. I remember walking into Bob's room, and he's sleeping. And I literally looked at him like, this is the last time I'll talk to him. And I remember just standing there, not wanting to disturb him, and just watching my mentor sleep for a few minutes. And I remember just looking at the walls because I just didn't know what to do. And I heard him wake up, and he said my name. And I'm like, "Oh man." His voice was weak and fragile. And I sit down, and we just start talking. And we talked for about 45 minutes. And we reminisced with stories and the stupid stuff I did as a kid. Because he witnessed a lot of that stuff, and the stories of him inviting me to Thailand, and the stories of him, me reminding him that he knew I was going to be a pastor before I did. And we're talking, and as we're talking, I'm realizing he is down to his last, few days. And I'm a mess at this point. And I'm crying, and my mask is hopefully covering some of the tears. And then he goes, "Take your mask off. I want to see you." I'm like, come on. So I take the mask off, and I'm just a blubbering mess at this point, which is okay because that guy, he cried all the time, and I made fun of him. Like, he'd be telling a story about something non-emotional, and he'd just start crying. I'm like, PB, what are you doing, man? So I'm crying this time. And he probably had the right to make fun of me. But I remember he asked me to pray for him. And my thought was, I shouldn't be doing this. You should be doing this for me. You're my pastor. I'm not yours. And I prayed for him. And I remember just praying this thing like, God, he's going to be with you soon. I've never prayed that prayer in my life about anybody in person like that. And afterwards, he wasn't upset. He wasn't like scared. He wasn't fearful. He's like, listen, like I thought I had more time too, but I get to go hang with Jesus. And then he said something to me that I'll never forget. It was one of the most powerful things. There's some things I will keep private with that conversation for the rest of my life, but this is one thing I think is so important to share because it's important for all of us. He goes, hey, I'll see you again. I will see you again. And that doesn't make sense to the outside world. When he is close to death, and Bob passed away 2 days later, I got a text 4th of July morning that he was gone. So I'm so thankful I had those moments with him. But he says, I will see you again. And it wasn't this thing of like cockiness. It was just this thing of confidence, this thing of peace that he knows he's about to die. And he is so confident that he and I, this is not our last interaction together because there is the hope of what we have in Jesus Christ. This peace that transcends all understanding. This peace that gets rid of anxiety, of fear, of insecurity. This thing that Jesus does for us that makes all the uncertainty in the midst of what we're dealing with feel like, you know what? No matter what happens, it's going to be okay. And that's a peace that doesn't make sense. And that's a peace that Bob had that I'm still trying to understand myself. And I'm sure you are too in life, some of you. But it's that reminder that, you know what, no matter what, this is not the end. This is not our lot in life. There is something so much more because of what Jesus has already done. And that should bring us a peace that transcends everything else. So we pray until that peace comes. Bob had that peace. I pray that you and I can pray for that peace too. Because uncertainty and chaos is a part of life. And sometimes God intervenes with the way we hope for. Sometimes he doesn't. Regardless, we need to be seeking the peace that only he offers because honestly, the world needs more of that. The world needs more people who have a peace that transcends all understanding. The world needs more followers of Jesus who rejoice in all things because of Jesus. The world needs more gentleness right now, and the world needs more people praying until that peace comes, and that's what we need to do. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you guys a couple moments to pray. And we're going to do communion after a couple of minutes. But here's what I'm asking you guys to do. Over the next couple of minutes, pray. But I want you to ask yourself, the thing you're praying for right now, what's so important about that? And ask yourself again, what's so important about that? Do that a few times. As you dig more and more, I want you to present that to God. And say, God, I need peace because of this. So take a few moments to reflect on this, to pray about this, and I'll come back up here in a couple of minutes to pray. And then we'll do communion, and then we'll worship again to wrap up our service, okay? So let's take a couple minutes to pray right now. But here's the deal. This type of prayer should not be a one-time thing. It should be something we constantly do, constantly work towards. So keep asking yourself, what's so important about that? And pray until that peace comes. And so what we do each week is we worship God because we worship where that peace comes from, where that rejoicing comes from, and that's Jesus. And we practice that through communion. And so together as one church, what we do is we take the bread. When we take this bread together, it's a reminder that this is where we find our rejoicing, our happiness from. It's Jesus because of what he's done for us through the cross. We take the bread, and together as one church, we drink the juice. It represents the blood that he shed for us. And we're reminded this is where we find that peace. So let me pray. We're going to worship and celebrate this truth together. God, thank you for today. God, there's a lot of things that we find uncertain, that we wonder about, that we're fearful about. But God, there's so many things that are lying underneath that. I pray that we can know what those things are, that you reveal those things to us, God, that we present them to you. And we receive this peace that doesn't make sense, but we trust you in it, God. That no matter what, no matter what's going on around us, we trust you in the midst of all of it. The truth that no matter what is going on now, you're working, and the hope we cling to for the future is there, and that promise will not be broken from you. We thank you for Jesus, and it's your name we pray.